Hello, and welcome to On Good Faith, a program sponsored by the Cape Cod Council of Churches. I am Jonathan Onquist, a pastor ordained in the Lutheran Catholic tradition, and it is and has been my pleasure to serve as your host for On Good Faith. Today we're going to be talking about one problem of the many that we as a people face. The problems are all around us. If you agree there are a lot of problems, please raise your hand. I'm glad to see all those hands raised because there are a lot of problems. And what do we do with them? Do we run from them and go in a corner and pray? Or do we run to the problem, pray, and work? What do we do? If you are a person of faith, and as we as believers in the saving grace of God in Christ, what are we called to do? Well, there are all kinds of issues, all kinds of dangers, all kinds of opportunities, and sometimes the choices seem impossible. I read a response to that quandary of how to make those kind of choices. It was this: the point isn't the conclusion you come to, the point is that you are in there. Good point. It's not the conclusion, it's the fact that you're dealing with it, you're there. We are called to put ourselves in there, to be active in the quest of resolution to the many problems that are faced by each of us and by us as a community. Today we're going to be dealing with what you've probably heard a lot about recently, opiate addiction. It's been identified as a public health emergency in the state of Massachusetts. Statewide, 1.7% of infants are treated for neonatal abstinence syndrome. In Falmouth, the rate was 2.6. That's a pretty significant difference. And 59 women receiving obstetrical care at Falmouth Hospital were identified as active users of illicit opiates and were in medication-assisted treatment for opiate addiction. It's quite pervasive. And the guilt and shame associated with opiate addiction during pregnancy and postpartum is unique, and many women feel ostracized even from their own recovery communities, their own families at times. Now, in the year 2013, Substance Abuse in Pregnancy Task Force was convened in Falmouth Hospital to explore the local problem of substance abuse among reproductive age women and to identify services that could be improved for their peripartum population. 3 points were identified. 1, better coordination of services through the continuum of prenatal care, maternity, and postpartum. 2, need for support groups, especially for mothers with histories of addiction during pregnancy and postpartum. And 3, a need for more transitional housing to support mothers in recovery and allow them to stay united with their infants in a safe, sober environment. The Mothers and Infant Recovery Network has as its mission statement this: our mission is to provide safe and sober resources for women and their infants from Cape Cod and the islands who are in recovery from addiction. The program will help women to progress in their recovery as well as provide support and education and life skills towards successful transition into community. Wow. What a mission statement. Our guests today, Dr. Deborah Haviland.
Hello.
And Diane Ogunlade.
Yes.
And Diane's youngest son, Adam, is here also. But now both of them, Deborah is a co-founder of Mothers and Infants Recovery Network, and both of these women are working with their facilitators for Mothers Helping Mothers. I'd like you ladies to tell us all, enlighten me, enlighten our audience about this issue and the positive aspects that you are trying to bring to the Cape Cod community. Ladies?
Yeah, well, we thank you very much, by the way. Thank you for
You're
having
welcome.
us. I really appreciate it. A little tricky. We've got some young children here, but it's okay. We're moms.
That's okay.
Yeah. So what happened was we convened the Substance Abuse and Pregnancy Task Force, and we started one of, like you said, one of the the needs we identified was for a support group. I am a physician. I trained in obstetrics. I did practice at Falmouth Hospital. I ended up having my own addiction, which took me out of practice. And since in the last several years, while I've been in long-term recovery, I've been working in the addiction field. But I've always been interested in the pregnant and postpartum moms. That was always my area of interest. So when the task force convened and we talked about the need for support groups, I became very vocal about that, because if you look at all the users, the opiate users out there, or all the users of any substances, as a group, we tend to be stigmatized. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what addiction is or why people behave the way they do. But when you look particularly at mothers, either mothers that use during pregnancy, that use in the postpartum period, or used when their children were young or even middle ages, there's a tremendous amount of stigma focused on that group, even among other people in recovery. So young women who are using opiates can become pregnant. Sometimes there's a denial of the pregnancy. There's a lot of fear around talking to an obstetrician about using. There's sometimes women don't even seek prenatal care because of the fear about the addiction. So 12-step meetings are great, but even sometimes in mixed groups, you've got men and women. Women don't often feel safe about talking about this particular issue. So women weren't going to meetings as much. Childcare is always an issue, that compounding that factor. So we decided to see if we could develop a group, peer support. So we're talking mothers to mothers. I'm a mother in recovery. Diane's a mother in recovery. Seeing if we could particularly focus on pregnant and postpartum women. That was our mission, was to bring the women together who could actually talk to each other about using in pregnancy and not feel shame. It was meant to be a safe, judgment-free zone where moms could tell their stories and have the other women around the table nod their heads and say, we get it, we get it, we get it. We get why you couldn't stop using. We get how your feeling of guilt and your feeling of shame, and we support you.
But the hope is, though, to go from that awareness and that acceptance to move back into a stable relationship outside.
Yeah.
When you're back into the society and be a productive participant in the society.
Absolutely. Well, the women that come to our groups, it's an interesting split because we have some women that are in programs. There's 2 recovery programs for mothers with children on the Cape. And then we have a number of women who are in the community. So we get a nice mixture, and that's actually an important thing, because you want to see women who are actually doing well in the community or who are struggling in the community versus women who are still in the treatment phase. So it's a nice sort of playback.
So how do you become a person that would be like a counselor or a facilitator like you both are? Do you have to go through the drug addiction trauma yourself to become a better facilitator, or?
I think with this population, I think it's really important to have a personal connection. So for me, I didn't use during my pregnancies, but I had postpartum relapses with postpartum depression, which is really common in our population. So, and I think it's important, it's a unique set of feelings that you have as a mother who, despite the enormous love that you have for your child, is still using a substance and can't stop. So I think we have a perspective that is very important, and women feel safe talking to us for that reason. And it's not clinical, it's really peer-to-peer.
But I think because of the ignorance of many people who are not in that addicted mode, they think, come on, you can get a hold of yourself and change this. But that's talking to the wind.
I wish that were true. I never intended on becoming addicted to any substance. I have a genetic predisposition, which most of us do. The thing about addiction is you don't know you're addicted till you're already there. Yeah. So and then your brain is sort of like being on fire, and all you can think about is the next use. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I could not stop myself. I couldn't, I'm an educated woman with a graduate degree. I could not stop myself from using. I couldn't get a hold of myself. I needed active intervention, and I needed other people who had been through it, who could help me get out of it. So.
And now you're trying to provide those kind of resources to women who are going through that same story you went through.
Exactly.
Now, Diane, in this whole story, where are you with the two little guys here?
I have been clean for a little over 4 years now. I had been clean prior through. I got into recovery in my early 20s, was when my journey began, but I had several relapses. In my last relapse, I became pregnant. I had already been using, and I became pregnant during that time, and I found it very difficult to stop using. And I had met other women who used during their pregnancy or who had lost their children because of their addiction, and I couldn't relate, and I judged. I did, you know, and I said I could never do that. I could never do that. I would never be that bad until I became that bad, until my disease had me that far. That I wasn't able to stop using while I was pregnant. But then I got into treatment, and I went through a program. I went through a program here on Cape Cod, and with the help of other mothers in recovery, I've been able to stay clean now, for over 4 years. So I'm able to relate to these women, and give them hope. My main thing is that I share my experience, that I've been there. I've been to that dark place where I hated myself and I wanted to die, and I was doing things that I thought I would never do, and there's nothing that I love more than being a mother. There's nothing I love more than being a mother. It's an absolute blessing, It's the best part of my life, but when I was in that mode, when I was controlled by my addiction, it went right out the window.
Now, do you feel successfully, I'm talking as an ignorant, not drug person.
We call you Earth.
Okay.
But I mean, do you feel like you're clean now, and you're not going to go back? I mean, how does one feel about their future when they've been in such a dark place?
I always tell women I respect my disease. I respect it. Because before I used to think that I had control, that maybe I could take a drink, or I could just, smoke one cigarette or smoke one joint, or take, just do one and I could control and I'll be better the next day. And that was never the case. Every time that I put a substance into my body, I continued to use. So for me, I respect my disease. I stay vigilant. I don't put myself in bad situations, because I've known people who've been clean for 10 and 20 and 30 years and then they relapse. I think maybe we forget where we come from.
That's a possibility.
Yeah,
When you
definitely.
made a mention about taking when you were pregnant, this figure that I was given by you before, it talked about a neonatal abstinence syndrome that the children are born with. Can you explain that?
Yeah, that refers specifically to babies that are born dependent on opioids. So that would be either, Percocet or Vicodin or OxyContin or
Because
heroin.
mother was.
Because mother was, right. So mother's taking in the opiates, and the baby, like the mom, becomes dependent on it. So the NAS, the neonatal abstinence syndrome, refers to those babies who, after birth, display withdrawal signs that are significant enough to need medical management. So.
Are they being handled successfully in most cases? I mean,
Yeah, but the hospitals are great.
Yeah.
They're really great. Unfortunately, they've had to become really good at this because it's such a common issue.
Yeah.
And the Cape has such a higher incidence than the rest of the state.
Yeah.
So they're very good at managing it. The good news is that babies who are born dependent on opiates tend to do very, very well long term, as long as the rest of the family and the other pieces are in good standing. So.
Now, one of the things that Mothers and Infants Recovery Network was talking about is housing.
Right.
And when a mother comes out, if she has been addicted and comes out with the baby, going back to the community she was from may be not a good place to be.
Well, I don't necessarily believe have that. I mean, a lot of people say that. They say, you know, you use on Cape Cod, you should get off the Cape.
Yeah.
But the other thing, wherever there's a lot of addiction, there's also a lot of recovery. So there's great recovery on the
Very
Cape.
interesting statement.
So I mean, you have both sides of the same coin. So, and what sometimes we see is someone go get treatment. So I actually went to Georgia for a few months to get treatment. I went to a special doctor program. I went to for 4 months. And I went to meetings out there in Georgia, and I got all these connections, you know, out in Georgia. I came back home, and I didn't have that sort of recovery network set up. So I'm a big fan of treating people where they live, because that's, you know, you have to, and that's one of the issues we have, is we have women who are in treatment or women coming out of jail who actually get into some recovery. They go into the community where they live, but one of the big missing pieces that we're seeing is that the life skills piece is missing.
Yeah.
Most individuals start using substances during their adolescence, and then I'm watching my 20-year-old son right now, who is going to college and living sort of on his bed later. You've missed that whole piece. So you've gone to treatment, you're in recovery, you come out, you go home, but you don't know how to manage a budget.
checkbook.
You don't know how to go food shopping. You don't know how to feed yourself. Never mind, now you have a child you have to feed. So, so our dream is to, you know, we have all the sober houses out in the community that people hear about, is to have a transitional recovery sober house for women with children to be in for periods of time, and then really build up the life skills. There's many organizations that are fantastic in the community that provide the different life skills training, but we need a safe place where women can be in the middle piece before they actually are on their own in the community.
As we're talking about places like that, being a guy and a father, where's the father in this scenario? Is the father not part of the story, or is the father in the house too, trying to help his wife or the mother of his child recover? Where's the father?
Well, I mean, and Diane can speak to this too. Most of the women we work with are very young. They did not get pregnant on purpose. They got pregnant while they were actively using. They may, I would say, the large percentage of them have using partners. And the men may either not be in the picture, or they may be still actively using. It's kind of unusual to have a father who's stable in recovery, or not having used at all, in the picture. But you know.
But isn't that why you'd want to have the woman out of relationship with the using father? I mean, that's
it's a big challenge.
It's a huge piece, and it's something that we talk about a lot with the women in our groups, because the majority of the relationships that they're in aren't healthy. You know, the majority of them, as Deb said, they get pregnant while using, with a using partner. Very, very small exceptions. Sometimes there is a non-addict male who's supportive and healthy, but
that's not
it's not usually the case.
So we actually recommend that the women stay out of relationships, you know.
Period.
Because
during this recovery.
right, because they need to grow up, you know. Again, you've been using since you were a teenager, you know, you have to sort of grow up, you have to learn how to take care of yourself, you have to learn how to take care of your child. Getting distracted by relationships can be a real big piece of relapse and downfall for young moms. So.
One of the things I thought significant when we were talking before the cameras started going was the move now to bring this to the correctional facility. What is, I mean, that sounds wonderful, but what's the plan?
Well, see, right now we have two groups. We have one in Falmouth and we have one in Hyannis. They're both thriving.
By thriving, meaning numbers? How many numbers?
We have a robust group of at least somewhere between 12 and 15 women that show up in Falmouth, and they go in and out, you know, different women. And then in Hyannis, we run somewhere between 8 and 12. Both groups have been going. Falmouth has been going for more than 2 years already.
Well, I'd like to say, in accord with that, is you told me that you provide babysitting.
We provide transportation and childcare.
And that's
Right.
fantastic, because
Right.
that would prohibit
huge
some women
obstacle.
very
Yes.
coming close to it.
Right.
That's
Yes.
wonderful.
So we thought, we've been asked to expand the group into Orleans, which is a little bit trickier for transportation because things are a little bit more spread out. But the other thought was to go into Barnstable County Correctional Facility, where we know there are often 1 or 2 pregnant women there, and there's certainly mothers there. So what we thought is, if we could start the conversation and the support and in the facility, and then when they leave, they can go into one of the 3 community support groups and already have a familiar face. And hopefully, I mean, it's all about connections, like any other human experience. It's really about having a connection with someone that you feel is on your team
Someone
and
you can trust.
understands your experience. And that's the whole drive. And for me, it's a spiritual drive. I really want to reach a hand out to someone, like someone reached a hand out to me when I was in trouble. So,
And that's the handout. Some people look at handout as a negative, but the handout you're talking about is a handout of offering support.
right, I'm talking about the hand of
And
a
the-
human,
yeah,
one
and
human to the next.
Touching
Yeah.
people. And that's so important in all kinds of relationships. When you can get past the addictive phase, you can get positive reinforcement by having somebody that you can just say hello
Right.
to. And I think that's so important. And I think your work as facilitators for the Mothers Helping Mothers, what is that like? I mean, you're with other mothers just to be there to listen, to converse, to share? Is that the story?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we sort of guide the conversation. Sometimes women will get distracted and get into just kind of gossipy, or sometimes we sort of can make sure everybody gets a chance to speak.
And also direct people, because there are all kinds
Right.
of facilities around the Cape and the islands where are providing things for women in these kind of situations that sometimes we are unaware of.
Right.
So I think that, you mentioned that as one of your objectives here at the, when you began with, to bring coordination of the services, the continuum of care. I think that's very important, because people need to know what's there. There's a lot of
Yes.
stuff there, and a lot of times different places are providing the same thing and they don't even know the other place is providing the same thing. Is that a
Yeah.
problem you've dealt with or
Oh,
aware of, or?
We haven't. We're actually a very unique group, because there are certainly a lot of groups that are run by counselors and parenting groups and trauma groups and certainly the 12-step meetings. But this is really a unique sort of model, because it's really
Run by
just
you.
peer to peer.
Yeah.
There's no therapists. We're not clinical. We don't have our clinical hats on in that room. We're mothers in recovery, and that's it. And we just sort of, and our role is just to make sure that everybody feels supported and the conversation is staying on topic.
And as you said, there are different women that come at different times.
Right.
Do you try to, if let's say Mrs. Smith has been coming for 2 weeks and all of a sudden doesn't show up anymore, do you call Mrs. Smith?
I do.
I mean, is that part, to be sure Mrs. Smith
Right.
is
Yes.
still okay?
Yeah, I do this sort of pre-group. I'm the facilitator for both Hyannis and Falmouth, so I do a pre-group thing where it's with all our community moms, because the treatment group moms come as a group. So the community moms, I do a lot of texting and Facebook messaging and phoning. So I'm getting better with social media, and sort of just say, hey, hope to see you tonight. How you doing? Do you need a ride? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that helps. I think that really helps sort of motivate people to keep in contact too.
Does this whole effort help you, Deborah, in your recovery?
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the same with you, Diane, right? I mean, being participant in this effort to bring healing to other people brings healing
Definitely.
to yourself. And I think
Yeah.
that's a very important aspect of what you women are doing. Well, I hope you can
Yeah.
continue to do that with
Yeah.
good power. And that mission statement, I think, is quite broad and quite covers a lot of bases,
Right.
and you've got a lot of work in front of you
We do.
for this. And I
Yeah.
hope and pray you can stay together and know there is a strength that'll give us the power to move through these issues, and there's hope.
Yes, there's always hope. Yeah.
Thank you, Deborah
Yeah.
and Diane. I want to just conclude with, I thought this was interesting. I was looking at a book entitled The Heart of Christianity, Rediscovering a Life of Faith. And it's talking about the book of, Old Testament book, Micah. And Micah asks, what does the Lord require of you? Questions. What does the Lord require of each of us? And Micah's answer is to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. I think that is something we all can aspire to do justice, to love kindness, and walk humbly, realizing we don't all know the answer, but we can be participant in breaking the answer to others, and by our work, our efforts to bring hope. So I thank you, ladies, very much, and you two young gentlemen. You've done a very good job here today. Good artwork, and the youngest one, Adam, was sleeping, so that was very,
Worked out
very
beautifully.
nice.